Good morning, everyone. I will give everybody a couple of seconds to tune in. So we're a couple minutes early this morning. Hi, James. Good morning, everybody. I just asked Naz to join, so hopefully in a second she'll tune in. We're going to talk about peace and family law today and what it has to do with divorce. It's such a funny acronym. And check in a little bit on our weeks because we have both had very crazy weeks. Let me try this one more time. Ooh, I can hear you typing away in the background over there.
Good morning.
Good morning. You are trial prepping?
Yeah.
So it's been a pretty fun few days for you. Trial on Friday, trial on Monday.
I have 2 trials tomorrow, and I had 1 on Friday. I am exhausted.
And Friday was relocation, right?
Correct. We had a relocation trial. Our client was trying to relocate.
And then you also have a weird button popping up on the bottom. I don't know what that is. Of someone asking to join. Sorry, we don't let other people on our lives. You can ask questions in the comments though if you have a question. And you have relocation tomorrow too?
No. Tomorrow's not relocation. Tomorrow's a whole bunch of contempt and suspension of time sharing and all kinds of fun things.
But you won Friday's trial.
Yeah.
And that guy's been our client for a very, very long time.
For a long time, but not only has he been our client, but we have represented his family members too. So he had family members, which is how this family originally came to us, family members that hired us when I first started doing family, like years and years and years ago. It was one of my first like solo family cases.
Yeah.
So they were very happy. They had great outcomes. And so when his situation came up, he hired us. And he's very, very happy. Like he's very, very happy.
It's funny. I'm thinking about it as you were saying that. I was thinking in my head, like through a list of clients that we've had for a really long time, and like we actually have so many clients that we've represented them in like multiple different things.
Yeah.
I was thinking in my brain, we also have a client right now who she has been my client since I was a legal aid attorney in 2010.
Yeah.
And I have represented her through multiple different things that have happened, like not even all related to one another necessarily. And then I was thinking, I have another client who's not our client right now, but she also has been with me since that time. And I've been with her through 2 divorces, a custody modification, a relocation, a domestic violence case, and weirdly a probate case, which I shouldn't even be saying, but I did assist her with a probate with help from somebody else, and I learned my lesson, and I will never do that again. So we are here today. I also, by the way, have had a crappy week and have posted many a rant on Instagram over the last few days. Because I'm just so over parents in the state of Florida right now. like in general, I don't think there's anything harder about this job for me than like being witness to irrational parents who do things that like are just hurting their kids and just can't put their kids' interests first. Like any like bad day in court, any bad judge, like honestly, I feel like these parents like get under my skin more than anything else.
Yeah.
I
No,
try to have
I
like
get that.
grace and patience about it, because I also realize that, you know, like when people are working with us, they're going through kind of like the worst times ever. And so their behavior is like the worst behavior that they're going to have. And
Yeah.
the most like salty, revengeful, petty kind of behavior that we all have when we get mad about something or get, you know, hurt by something. But it's like so painful to watch it when it plays out on kids. Which kind of segues, I guess, into today. So, peace, PEACE. And people always think that's a funny acronym. I learned that acronym in law school, and a lot of lawyers use it. But people think it's a funny acronym. In my brain, instead of hearing like peace when I talk about it, I hear like peace out, like peace, done, moving on. So the P in peace is parenting issues. Something's very loud on your end.
It literally just started printing. I have no idea what's happening.
It like sounds like we're in the middle of, I don't know what we're in the middle of, but it's like louder than a printer should be. It's like you have like
right next to the printer. Like the printer's right next to the phone, and it just like it was like I'm gonna start printing now. Okay.
Is it continuing or?
No, I canceled it. It should stop in a second. Now is not the time.
Live.
Lord. Today's not gonna go well. I just have a feeling. What are we talking about?
We're supposed to be talking about the P in peace.
Got it.
And I was telling you that I always think peace like peace out instead of peacefulness. And the P in peace is parenting issues. So it is like the reason that peace is important is because that is actually the order that we go in when we're going through these issues, because each one kind of builds on the next one, right? So you have to know what your parenting issues are in order to really determine equitable distribution, although those have less to do with one another. And then you have to have equitable distribution before you can know what your alimony is. You have to know what your alimony is before you can know what your child support is. And then you have all of these little remaining things. So when it comes to the parenting issues, like what are the main things that we're trying to accomplish?
So I think that there are two really, really big things, right? So we have time sharing and parental responsibility. That's what I always think of is the two big ones, right? Which a lot of people use the word custody. I mean, I had 3 phone calls this week, people saying, well, I want custody. So I think it's important to continue to, you know, educate people and let them know that legally the word custody just doesn't exist anymore. So it basically got broken up into 2 concepts, right? So we have time sharing, which is the amount of time that each parent spends with the child. That's usually when you hear things like 50-50, like this new law we have, right? So 50-50, 50-50 means equal time sharing. And when we're talking about time sharing in the state of Florida, we are actually referring specifically to overnights when we're talking about these percentages. You have to calculate everything else and you have to have a schedule and you got to figure out, you know, Monday, Tuesday, mom, Wednesday, Thursday, dad. But when we're talking about the actual overnights and percentages, that's important because that segues into calculating child support, right? So we have custody got broken up into time sharing, which is what we just talked about, and parental responsibility. Parental responsibility is the decision-making part that we all have as parents, right? So what school our kids go to, what surgeries they receive or don't receive, medication that they take or don't take, things like that. So those are the 2 big ones, but obviously there's a lot more to being a parent, right? We got to figure out what if any travel restrictions we are imposing, you know, extracurriculars, what are they allowed to be enrolled in? Who's allowed to enroll them? Who's going to be responsible for paying it? So there is so much, which is so helpful that you did that parenting plan course the other day, right? Because there's so much to put in a parenting plan. You know, I talked to some of my clients and they're like, well, I didn't even think about this. Like I didn't, especially when kids are younger, right? You don't think about what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years or the different things you're going to need to figure out and decide in 5 to 10 years. So yeah, a lot goes into parenting.
So there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
It is interesting though, like, so the state of Florida has all of these forms that you can use for family law pleadings and things. And they have a family law, like a Supreme Court form parenting plan, which is what a lot of people use. But it's important to realize that that's not required. The statute requires you to have a parenting plan, but it very loosely defines what that means. It basically says you've got to address parental responsibility and you've got to address time sharing, and that's it. So it doesn't really require any sort of heightened level of detail, but you definitely want heightened level of detail in your parenting plan, because you don't want to end up in court like the people I was in mediation with on Friday, where they have 26 teeny issues and they keep ending up back in mediation in court because they can't agree on anything at all. So you can use the parenting plan form that the Supreme Court gives you, but really there's a lot that's missing out of that form too. And like Naz said, I don't want to spend too much time this morning talking about parenting stuff, because I have the parenting plan workshop that I did, and it's free and it's on our website, so you guys can sign up for it and get most of the information on parenting stuff there. But after parenting issues are resolved, and those get resolved through a parenting plan, then next up you have equitable distribution. Now I hear some new thing happening.
Now what?
I hear like some new thing happening.
No,
it's just me. Maybe I'm
it's just in your head.
Okay.
So
next up is equitable distribution. And that's the division of assets and debts in Florida. And the big major player concepts with equitable distribution is figuring out what is marital and what is non-marital, and getting those things into their right columns. And that's done on your financial affidavit, but we also produce kind of discovery statements and things like that to make sure those numbers are accurate. And what you're looking for in equitable distribution is, first you have to figure out, like I said, what's marital, and you want all of the marital debts and all of the marital assets kind of put into two pots. And at the end of the day, your goal is for whatever all those assets are minus all those debts, that's your marital equity. And you want that to be split up basically equally, unless there are some special circumstances involved. So a lot of people, I think, believe with equitable distribution that it means that every single asset gets cut in half, right? Like if I have a car, I'm going to sell my car and we're going to split it in half. Or if we have a checking account, then we're going to split the amount, or the 401k. And it doesn't really necessarily work out that way. A lot of assets, even though they may have a same numerical value, they don't have the same real tangible value. And so an example of that is like, if you have $100,000 in a 401k versus having $100,000 in cash sitting in a safe, the value of that $100,000 is different. The 401k has penalties and fees and rules associated with it, and interest and those kinds of things, whereas cash is just sitting there as cash. And the other thing is that we try to not divide things as much as possible. So if you have a 401k that has $100,000 in it, and the other person has a 401k that has $100,000 in it, it would make no sense to divide those. You would just each keep your own, and they kind of wash each other out. So it's really more of a global puzzle that we put together when it comes to equitable distribution. I did see a comment in the comment section, and no, if you're trying to file an appeal related to a family law case, you're going to file that appeal in the state that issued the family law order. So what else about equitable distribution? So equitable distribution also is going to play a role in determination of alimony. And that is because the main determining factor at the bottom of everything for alimony is what, Nazarena? Are you paying attention to me?
I'm kind of paying attention. We're talking about need and ability? Yes. I got it. So if you all have, for example, a home, and that home has a substantial amount of equity, and you split it in half, and you each walk away with half, then the person who's requesting alimony doesn't have as much of a need as they would before walking away with $400,000 in equity in the home, right? Because they have that money now, and so they can use that money to buy a new house, to pay some of their bills, to pay some of it. So one of the things that happens is you have to determine what, if anything, you all are each walking away with in terms of assets and also in terms of debts, right? Sometimes in the debts, you can have someone who takes on more debt than the other, right? So if you take on a substantial amount of debt, then your ability to pay the alimony then is thereby reduced, right? So that's why it's important to figure out what's getting split, who's being responsible, what's left, what penalties there are, who's going to pay for things afterwards. So for example, when she mentioned the 401k, there's a way that we have in family court to avoid some of these fees and costs and penalties and interest, and it's by virtue of a quadro. But a quadro is a document that has to get prepared by an attorney, so someone has to pay that other
Qualified domestic relations order.
Sorry, I know I do that. So quadro stands for Qualified Domestic Relations Order, which is in essence an order that says, look, we're doing this split as part of a divorce, so we're not going to go down the road of penalties and all that. So somebody has to pay that lawyer. So there are lots of costs and things associated with it that can have an effect on ultimately what's going to happen with alimony. And then go.
No, the other thing that happens with equitable distribution and determining marital and non-marital assets and debts is also your non-marital assets or debts can play a role in your need or ability, right? So it, like, you also, if you are a person who has, you know, $1 million in a trust account and you're living off the interest of that every month, that may be your non-marital property. Your spouse is not entitled to any portion of that $1 million trust. But if you're getting income off of that or draws off of that, or you have access to that, then that may change your ability to pay alimony as well.
Yeah. And so to kind of touch on some of this, right? So we've gone through P for parenting, E for equitable distribution, A for alimony. So when we're segueing into from alimony to child support, there's something important to keep in mind, right? So child support, are we still on A for alimony? Nice segue to child support.
We're still on A for alimony. The only other thing that I would mention about alimony before we move to child support is that we have a new statute.
Yeah.
And that happened last summer, and that's kind of revolutionized alimony in Florida on some level. On another level, I don't know that it made as big of a difference in actual real life. The difference that I think it did make in actual real life is that it just becomes easier for us to have conversations about alimony, because now we have a structured plan that tells us kind of what the maximum amount is going to be for any particular set of circumstances. But it is really important, and I have seen lawyers messing this up in mediation over the last 6 months. It's really important to know that just because we have a statute that gives us a formula does not mean that you skip over need and ability to pay. You still have to determine if there is a need and ability to pay. And if there is, then you look at the statute to see what the maximum amount of that is. But if the statute tells you that alimony should be $1,000 a month and the person's need is only $800 a month, then the alimony is going to be $800. It's not going to be $1,000 a month. So with that said, moving on to child support.
So, and just to comment on that briefly for people who don't know, before last year, there was no formula for alimony. We would just kind of sit around and try to figure it out. But now that there is a formula, you're required to plug in those numbers and it shoots out a number for alimony. But the thing I wanted to mention about the segue from alimony to child support, the reason why it's important to do things in this order is because of the way that everything plays out, right? So equitable distribution, you figure out who gets what. Do we still have a need and ability, right? Does one person still have the need? Does the other one have ability for alimony? If so, right, hypothetically speaking, if that happens and alimony is assessed, when you move over to C for child support's a formula. It's been a formula for years, right? But the formula is dependent on each person's income. And that's very important to calculate after alimony. Why? Because once the person is receiving alimony, that now is income for that person, right? So if the person receiving alimony gets an additional $500 a month in alimony, that $500 a month gets added on to whatever income that person already has. And conversely, the payor of alimony now has $500 less from their income. So when you're plugging in your numbers for child support, you have to reduce the payor's income by $500, which, you know, when we're sitting, especially at mediation, and we're sitting around trying to figure this out, a lot of what happens is you have to figure out, well, do I even want alimony, right? Like, you have to figure it out. You have to play with the numbers and what makes sense. Does it make sense to get alimony and have that reduced from your child support? Because it'll go lower, right? There will be a decrease on the amount of child support.
Yeah.
Or does it make sense to not even include it and let's just have child support, right? Because child support will last X amount of time versus alimony. That's why mediations are so complicated. And you have to make sure you're prepared and you are prepared to calculate all of this and figure it out, because there's a lot of playing around, which is helpful when you're in mediation because you can do that, right?
Yeah.
You have the ability to be creative and figure out what works for this family as a whole.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it doesn't work out to do alimony, even though you have need and ability and we have a formula and there's an amount. Maybe it makes more sense for this family to just skip that and just have child support calculated.
And that was my post. I posted about that on Monday this week because I was in mediation on Monday as the mediator, and the wife who was there does not have custody of her kids, doesn't see her kids really, and the kids live with dad, but she is basically unemployed and has been unemployed for a long time, and he had a decent job. So she had an alimony request, and she came into mediation like fired up that she's getting alimony. She meets the requirements. She has a need. The statute says she's getting alimony. And when you run the alimony calculation through the statute, it had her getting alimony of, I don't know, let's say like $1,000 a month. But she also owed child support of like, you know, I don't know, without alimony, $400 a month or something. So when you put that alimony, that $1,000 of extra income in for her, her child support goes up. So she's thinking she's going to get a check every month for $1,000. But in reality, she's not going to get a check for $1,000 because that alimony is driving up the child support. And maybe she's going to get $1,000 check, but she's going to send him back $650 in child support. So she's really not walking away with $1,000, which is what was just mind-boggling for her on Monday and caused so many problems, because she just could not understand how she wasn't going to get her alimony, and she had not, you know, maybe didn't understand that coming into mediation. So that's alimony. And then there's also this sort of like everything else category. And with everything else, we're talking about all of the other little details, like, are you going to change your name? Who's going to, how are passports going to work? Taxes, dependency exemptions.
Attorney's fees is another big one.
Yeah.
You know, are we going to have someone pay for another person's attorney's fees?
Yeah. Attorney's fees is a really big one that goes into that category. So there's like all of these other sort of catch-all little provisions that go into it as well. So if you are starting to think about a divorce or you're in the middle of a divorce, I really recommend that you work through the issues and the things you need to think about in that order, that you start with parenting issues, really get familiar with parenting plan options and provisions. I would highly suggest you sign up for that class if it's something you're going through because it's free. Equitable distribution, figuring out marital, non-marital assets and how we're going to divide them up and what's going to be the process for making that happen. Alimony, need and ability to pay. Then you deal with child support, and then you have all of the other stuff. And all of that either gets wrapped up into a marital settlement agreement that you both agree to, sign off on, file with the court, and get a divorce, or if you can't reach an agreement on either all or some of the issues, then you end up in front of a judge. And a judge is making a decision about each of those 5 elements, the PEACE, and that gets wrapped up into a final judgment. So one way or another, those 5 issues are going to get resolved in the divorce, unless, of course, like you don't have kids, then you'd eliminate 2 of them. All right, guys. Well, that is our Sunday morning live, and we will see you next Sunday for another topic. Bye.
Bye, everyone.